Hello, hello. Welcome to Political Frenemies. This is the show where two friends, a conservative and a liberal Democrat, talk politics, and the idea is that we still remain friends afterwards. I'm Chris Newton. I'm an academic and I'm a former Tory Defence Policy Advisor. And with me, as always, is Mathew Hulbert, Lib Dem activist and former councillor. Now, this is our first episode after our Easter break. We took a short break for the Easter weekend. How was your Easter? And a belated Happy Easter, Mathew.
Yeah, belated Happy Easter to you as well, Chris, and of course to all of our viewers and listeners. Yeah, it was peaceful, but I have to say it was the first Easter that I can remember where I can't say I had no chocolate at all, because I had a couple of little pieces of dark chocolate, which I've researched that I was all right to have as a type 2 diabetic, but that was literally it. When, previously, and this may be the reason for the type 2 diabetes, but previously I would have probably had a couple of Easter eggs, of the milk chocolate variety. So it was very different in that sense. But I got to see family, which is always great. So yeah, it was good. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, just a nice, quiet Easter with family. Got to see family as well. And yeah, just what I like about the Easter weekend is that it's kind of like Christmas weekend, although not quite, but it's like Easter in the sense that it's a little bit more quieter, and you've got 4 days where things are a bit calmer and you can reflect, and you're not getting hung up on the day-to-day sort of chaotic processes of work and life and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I should also point out, of course, I should have pointed this out before talking about the Easter eggs, but it was just in my mind. That I went to church on as I do every week, but obviously it was the most important church service of the Christian year, the Christian calendar. So I go to a local church here in Hinckley, an inclusive church, I should point out. So it was really good to go there, and obviously I remember certainly what we as Christians obviously believe is the prominence of Easter weekend, which is the sadness of Good Friday, where Jesus was put to death, and then obviously his resurrection to new life on the Sunday. So always quite an emotional service for me, that one. And I took communion, had the representations of the body and blood of Jesus. And so, yeah, I mean, for me, that was the most important part of the day. And I sometimes think with, I put something out about this on social media, actually, and got a bit of a blessing from some people, because I saw obviously I think about the Lib Dems, but actually all parties weren't the same. Some of the parties did have a cross representation on their graphics, for Easter Day, as well as Easter eggs. Whereas for the Lib Dems, it was just Easter eggs. So almost as if we wanted to forget the idea that it was ultimately a religious festival, and ultimately a time for Christians to celebrate Jesus. But I was told that I was being far too sensitive, and that I should get on with my day. So I did.
Maybe you're in the wrong party.
Chris?
Maybe you're in the wrong party. Maybe you should come over to the Conservative.
I don't think
side,
I am in the wrong party, but there's no doubt that the Lib Dems are overwhelmingly kind of secularist. Now, you can be secular and also have a religious faith. People think you can't. Secularism is different to actual atheism. But anyway, we won't get into a debate about religion. But I had a lovely time. At church, and then the rest of the day panned out as it did. So it was good.
No, great to see that you had a really nice Easter, and now it's back to normal politics, the hum and drum of normal politics. And what we're going to be discussing today is something inspired by something else, another big event of the week, which is St. George's Day, and we're going to talk about what Sir Keir Starmer said about St George's Day and the questions flowing from that. In particular, patriotism: is it a force for good? Does the English flag need reclaiming? And really exciting questions like that. And yeah, it might get a little bit lively as well, because we do have our own views about patriotism.
Well, just on that, Chris, before we get into it, I've literally just been reading a few minutes ago something put out on social media by the Church of England, and they were actually just making clear that, and I know I'll let our viewers and listeners into something here. We debated whether to discuss this issue and whether it'd be seen as perhaps a bit old hat at the end of the week. But the Church of England says that actually it's not really St George's Day this year until Monday, because there's some rule that if it falls in Easter week, it's the following, the week after that. So it's actually, officially speaking, I think I'm right in saying now, not actually happened yet. So we're right in the middle of celebrating St George's Day.
Unfortunately, we can't take this Monday off, but I'm sure if people want to celebrate it again, I'm not against that at all. But that's a very interesting fact. I didn't know that, actually. You learn something new every day, and you learn something every podcast with Political Frenemies. That's the great thing.
So can I just note, Chris? Can I just note here that I'm the one, as we'll get into talking about, I'm the one who gets a bit uncomfortable with big shows of kind of patriotism, and yet I was the one who knew that fact. So there we are.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't really have a comeback for that, because I didn't know that, but there's different ways. There's different ways you can express patriotism, as I'm sure we'll get into. So before we get into it, it's time for the best part of the show, which is our little jingle. So let's do this. Right. So, as mentioned, our topic is all about patriotism. And what has inspired this is not just St George's Day, but a little speech that, or remarks that our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, gave on the eve of St George's Day. It was on the 22nd. I think he gave the speech where he was talking about St George's Day, and he said a few things. And among some of the things that he said was firstly, he described himself as a proud Englishman. And but that's not that's not the bit that got at least people on the right's backs up. But he after saying that St George's Day was a celebratory day, and is saying that all of the things that he thinks are good about England, he then proceeded to bring up various issues, such as he was talking about, whilst this was a day for celebration, we must not be under any illusions that we also need to fight for our flag. Our flag, St George's flag, has been taken by people who wish to sow division. He talked about the Southport riots. He talked about people holding holding St George's flags whilst throwing bricks at businesses, and he talked about the need to wrench the flag from those who want to divide the nation and stoke division. Now, that's caused a lot of controversy, especially on social media and especially on parts of the right. And I would say that if this is meant to be a day of celebration, then surely we should just stick to that and maybe discuss the other, more controversial and more negative aspects on another day. Now, if you wouldn't bring up controversial issues concerning identity with any other identity group, then surely you'd not do the same for England as well. Otherwise, you're being totally inconsistent. So I do think it was inappropriate for Keir Starmer to bring this up. I think this ultimately shows what he really thinks of the English flag, or at least what conjures up in his mind when he sees one. He seems to see people throwing bricks. I'm not saying that we shouldn't discuss a division and that we shouldn't discuss the far right extremists and how we counter that and everything. But it was St. George's Day. We're meant to celebrate all what's good about England, its culture, its identity, its history. And maybe it was just a little bit inappropriate to bring all of this stuff in for that day. What say you?
Well, so a number of things in response to that, Chris, and I'm really interested to hear what you say. I think the first thing to say is that, you know, with folks like you on the political right, I do think that Starmer can't win. If he says nothing on St. George's Day, or very little, he's called unpatriotic. But if he says something and makes a thoughtful speech, which I'm sure he thought he was doing, and you know, I've listened to it again in preparation for this podcast, and there was bits I agreed with more than others, but I thought it was a fairly thoughtful contribution. But if he says, but for you lot on the right, even if he does make a speech like he did this week, he's then just a plastic patriot and doesn't really mean it. So, I mean, my first thing to say is that you guys on the right need to make your mind up about what your attack on Keir Starmer is. I think the second thing to say, and again, where I'd argue with one of your points there, Chris, is that I think that one of the, and as I say, I'm not particularly a great one for patriotism, and perhaps I'll explain why shortly. But what I would say is that one of the great things about the English, the British, actually is that we're not afraid of questioning power. We're not afraid of giving our view, as we do on this podcast each week. And that actually kind of critical thinking is a good part of the English tradition as well. And so to kind of say that we must all have this jolly day where we don't reference anything that is in any way negative, I'm not personally sure that that is particularly English or British. And rather along the same lines, I mean, my personal view is that, you know, I think these great shows of kind of patriotism are in of themselves kind of a bit un-British. I mean, we're kind of known for our understatements, for our stiff upper lip, for good or for ill. And I just wonder whether, and let's be honest, Chris, as well. Another point to this, and then I'll let you back in, is that, you know, again, the likes of you and other people on the centre, right, and right say that, oh, we shouldn't use this day as a political football. The fact is, it is used as a political football. The right thinks it's got one up on the left on a day like St. George's Day, because those of us on the centre left and left, I guess, have been brought up with finding it difficult because of the connotations, rightly or wrongly. So I'll say rightly or wrongly, but with the historic connotations alongside kind of football hooliganism and the far right and all of that. And so it does make us feel a little bit uncomfortable. And you guys know that. And so you do these great, and I kind of notice you doing this a little bit on St. George's Day, Chris, that oh, well, look at my great display of patriotism on social media, and but you know that's a little bit of a needle to the left, isn't it? That's partly why you guys do it. Come on, admit it.
Well, to be honest, I don't do it that often. Even you must admit that. I mean, partly yes, but I think it's just a kind, nice thing to do to celebrate. We don't get many days like this, the British and the English. We don't have big national days like other countries do, so it's good to do that. But my point would be is that it shouldn't wind the people on your side up. You know, if we're all one nation, to coin the conservative phrase, then it shouldn't get your backs up. So and it just, you know, puzzles me that it would. So yes, I do know it does annoy some people, and yes, that is amusing. But there is a serious point to that, in the sense that, aren't we all English? Aren't we all British? And shouldn't we just celebrate being English for this one day, as opposed to pour cold water on it?
But do you understand, at least even if you don't agree, which you obviously don't, do you understand the reasoning why some of us are a bit anguished about such a day? Because there's no denying, it's just a historical fact that the far right wrapped itself, and albeit probably still does, albeit that thankfully it's not arguably as prominent as it once was when we had the BNP and all of that. But they wrapped themselves in the flag, and that kind of became their symbol. And so for those of us who were obviously politically opposed to the far right and the extreme right, or whatever you want to call it, trying to take the flag back, as much as we perhaps should do that, undeniably should do it, is difficult. So there's that point, number one. And I think another point, number two, that also makes it difficult for those of us on the left and centre left, is that I would call myself an internationalist. I'd say that I want the best for all nations and for all peoples. And so a day celebrating one nation, even if it's our own, again, feels a bit uncomfortable. Now, even if you disagree with those 2 points, do you see where they come from, or do you think that they're just not really an argument at all?
No, I mean, I understand that people's concern about far right groups, and I'm not saying that that isn't a valid concern. And I understand the concern, the anxiety, the anguish there, and is important not to give them oxygen, and is important. But then again, I share those concerns as someone who is who I don't mean this in a negative way. Obviously, I care more about these displays of patriotism than you do. I'm especially angered when other people with not so good intentions twist that for their own political or for their own agenda. So I think it's important to say, whether it's these far right groups, the BNP, the people who did the Southport riots, they're morons. They don't represent anybody but a very tiny fraction of people, and therefore we should say that, and we should always be resolute in our opposition to what they do. But at the same time, we shouldn't give them sort of credibility or ownership over something that they don't deserve, because the only people who are saying that the English flag, the St George's Cross, has been hijacked by the far right are mostly people on the left who keep saying that. And I said, well, how about we just celebrate St George's Day, celebrate the flag, just say that these people are morons, and not give them the credence of saying, well, they've hijacked the flag. And it's the same thing that we do for every other kind of extremist. We don't say that because it's we don't say that the Islamists represent Islam, and I'm pretty sure that Keir Starmer wouldn't bring up Islamism at a reception about Eid or some kind of Islamic celebration. So why are the double standards there?
Yeah, but don't you think that the reason for that, Chris, is that in a sense he can speak about this because he is what he's speaking about. He is an Englishman. I guess he feels that he's got more right to speak on this. Do you think?
I suppose there's that, and I suppose there's a reasoning for that. But also he's open to the charge of being inconsistent as well. He's not, and as Prime Minister, I think you have to remember he's not speaking for himself. He's speaking as the Prime Minister at a St George's Day reception for the nation, and it's being filmed and it's being distributed on social media. So I think he should be wary of that, and I think he should, he should. He knows he's going to open, and I'm pretty sure he's conscious that he's going to be open to the charge of inconsistency. So I think he should be wary of that, and I think his approach should be more consistent. Particularly, you said at the beginning, Starmer's going to be criticised no matter what, and there's an element of truth there, but there's a context to that. Starmer, has been open to the charge of being unpatriotic because of some of the things that he's done in the past, whether it's his stance on overturning Brexit and some of the things he said there, whether what he's doing in terms of the Chagos Islands, and also added to that charge sheet, and I know you disagree with this, is the fact that he chooses to bring up far right extremism at a St George's Day celebration. So yes, Starmer can't win either way, but he's built this up for himself, I think.
But wasn't his references to the riots and what followed, in terms of people then clearing up the streets and showing what's best of those communities, wasn't that the point that he was making? He was trying to show the difference between, as he would see it, and I think he's right, and I don't think you disagree in this sense with him, that whatever the grievances of those who were rioting, whether you agree with their particular grievances or you don't, the answer isn't to go and riot and to destroy your own communities. And I know you'd agree with that, Chris. So he wanted to show the difference between those people and what he would see as and I hope what we'd all see as the best of the English, which is the folks who obviously hadn't been part of that, but who nevertheless the following day, even though really it should have been the people who committed it who then went and cleared it up. That's another point, I guess. But people from the local community went out with their brushes and everything else and cleared up their area and got their area back to those communities back to what it should be. So I think he was just making that point, and I don't think that is an unreasonable point to make on a day such as St George's Day. Now, just whilst I've got the floor, I'll just have one more point, and that is that now I totally get, I often get this said back to me when I'm a bit critical of the idea of St George's Day on social media. That in fact, I'll give a reference to my my friend on social media, who is on social media as Last Blairite, and so you might guess his politics, Blairite.
Let me think about that.
And I was having a discussion with him on direct message, and he was saying to me, "Yeah, but Mathew, don't you guys realise that how can?" And I obviously don't speak for the Lib Dems on this. It is always just my personal view, but I think he meant not just the Lib Dems, but anyone who has my kind of view of feeling a bit queasy with some of this patriotism stuff. He said, "Don't you realise that some of you guys who hope one day to see your people, politicians running the country, don't you realise that you've got to love the country you want to govern?" And I totally get that point. I understand that kind of intellectually, but I mean, I guess I would find it easier to, and maybe this is hypocrisy on my part, and if it is, then fine. But I would say that I love my local community here in Hinckley and Bosworth. I've got a great love for that. I've got a great love for Leicester, where I was born, my nearest city, a great love for Leicestershire. I just find it difficult on the national level because of all that we've just talked about. So maybe that is hypocrisy. I don't know.
Yeah. But I mean, everybody recognises that in every nation there are good points and there are bad points. It's not exclusive to England. Every nation has to deal with whether it's dark parts of its history or whether it's dark parts of what its current politics. And now, whatever you say about reform, our problems with populism isn't the same as those on the continent. That's
Not at the
that's
moment.
if you see reform as a problem, which I necessarily don't. But so I think most of us are able to say yes, there are bad things. Yes, there are things that I complain about stuff in this country all the time. But at the end of the day, those bits aren't the country. The country
Right.
is the whole of it. The country is the history, it's the landscape, it's the institutions that we've built over time. It's the unique. It's not just a set of values. When people, I think, when people get asked this question, they list off a set of values. That's important, but that's not particular to the nation. When we're talking about the nation, we're talking about the specific institutions and organizations and culture of England or of Britain. So that all of that overwhelmingly cancels out all of the negative stuff that happens, and we're able to compartmentalize that and say, yes, there is bad stuff going on, but at the end of the day, we live in a great place. This is our home at the end of the day. Something that Kemi Badenoch says, and ultimately we live here, and we can either be miserable gits for the rest of our lives, or we can love it, and we can love our identity, just as like you love your parts of your identity that you like to highlight and value and so forth. We're the same. We've got for warts and all, we love our country because it's ultimately part of our identity. We can't change where we come from and where we're born, and we're going to make the best of it. So can you overcome that hurdle? Is that is your problem with patriotism? Is this kind of all of the negative stuff that has happened with England, or is it something to do with something else? Why is it why is it you don't have a problem celebrating your locality or the EU, as you've got an EU flag in your bio, and that's a landmass, that's a particular parcel of the world. Other parts of your identity which are important, but I think we'll just talk about land masses because these are the things that are directly comparable to the nation. I just don't understand why, especially Remainers, they say they hate flags, they hate show of patriotisms, and yet they've got like loads of EU flags in their bio, and they love the EU, and they sing the EU anthem and everything. So what is the difference there? Is it just England? Is it just Britain that there's some kind of disconnect there, or is
I
what's
don't
the
know,
difference?
and I mean, it'd be far easier for me if I didn't feel squeamish about these things, and it because then I'd just be joining in with everyone else, and there'd be no problem. But the fact is, I have always felt squeamish on St George's Day in particular. I must admit, and again, people have come to me. In fact, I think you have. On if I might just reveal this, Chris, on direct message, saying that, well, you're not so bothered about St Andrew's Day, etc., etc. But I just don't think those are the days, those kind of Celtic days have the same history of the connotations that St George's Day do. I just don't think they're the same. I just don't think there's the
Why?
same issues
I
around
don't.
those.
You've got those of us who've been on the receiving end of Scott Nat's trolls and bots.
Right.
There's a real strain of Anglophobia there. I won't go into the politics of Northern Ireland and Ireland,
But
but
then I'm
obviously
not.
there's stuff there as well. But
But then you make the
and they're
point for
part of
me.
the history, aren't they? They're part of our, people say, we don't like Britain because of the colonialism and so forth. Well, that's the whole nation, isn't it? So I don't. I don't get the precise problem with England, given you can point, as I say, you can point to any nation and say they've done bad stuff.
But again, rather like the point that I made about Keir Starmer and him feeling that he could make this speech because he is an Englishman. I mean, I guess the reason why, you know, my views are predominantly about St George's Day is because I am an Englishman, and so I feel I have a right to have a point of view about it, even if it's one that most people would disagree with. Now, I mean, I do question myself on it each year because I do think, oh, I'm just going to be, you know, posting on social media the same old lefty thing of, and it makes you look like you don't love your country, and it's not about that. I do
St
love the
George's
country. I
Day
just don't
wasn't
necessarily like great shows
English.
of.
St George wasn't English. So.
Uh, I just don't necessarily. I find it very, and you know, I love America. I've never been there, sadly. I hope to one day, but I love America, and I love the idea of America and liberty and all of that. So I'm not being anti-American when I say this, but I just think that kind of flag waving is a bit American. You know, I just don't think it's what we do here in the UK, but clearly it is. So maybe I'm just being very kind of old hat about that. The point you make about the EU is right, and again, I've thought about that as well, because I guess it is a kind of hypocrisy there, but I think what it's about is I just worry that the kind of Englishness that is being celebrated, and I've got to be very delicate as I say this, so I don't want to get myself in trouble, but I just worry that the kind of Englishness that is being celebrated is a very one-dimensional Englishness, and not. You see, when I see the EU flag, and when I see the pride flag, albeit that is not a national thing, that's an international thing, I think of diversity and inclusion and equality, all the things that I know you love, Chris. When I see the St George's Cross, perhaps wrongly, and perhaps it goes back to, again, that far right connotation, etc. But I don't see that, and so maybe I need some kind of maybe I've got to work through this stuff and try and, as you say, forget those morons, forget all that far right connotation. Don't let them have the field on this, and try and recognise that no, this is the flag of the nation. There's lots of good things about the nation that we can all celebrate, and just. I guess what it might be, Chris, if I can put it this way, is that perhaps as lefties just think a bit more about these things than you folks on the right, and so we get ourselves tied up in knots about some of these things rather than just celebrating the day. Do you think?
I think, and this goes back to something I think Roger Scruton said is that there does. And it's especially relating to kind of left-wing academics, and that is, I think, especially academics, and these days it's predominantly sort of left-wingers who are academic. They want to understand things that you can measure, that you can quantify,
Right.
that you can explain, that you can explain it kind of easily, and which is something which is tangible. Not everybody, the critical theorists don't, so well, I won't get into critical theory, but whereas patriotism, so the valuing the nation state is not something, is something that's not very easily explainable. Is not something. It's something spiritual. It's something. Is the same reaction that some people have to religion as well. It's not something that you can necessarily rationally develop a formula for, or something like that. So I don't know. I don't know if that might be that might be something, something in there, and maybe there is there is a default position on the left, which is to be skeptical about the West, England,
Maybe.
uh, and so forth, because it seems to be a bit of, especially EU flag worshipping. It does seem to be like a rebellion against Britishness and in Englishness, and it's a shame. It's a shame because I don't know if this was the case always in the past. Although I am thinking about the George Orwell essay, where he talks about kind of the middle class sort of left wing intellectuals being sort of anti-English, and they'd and so forth, and indeed the 1933 Churchill speech, which I always retweet every year, or also talks about all of this. But it's just a shame. It's just a shame that that we can't be more united on this, because I don't know, and I don't know whether you agree with this. I like patriotism because it's, obviously it's something that I feel it's something endemic in my identity, but I do think that patriotism is a force for good. It's a unifying force. It has various different social functions which are beneficial. It's the glue that binds people together. Remember that you can distinguish between patriotism and nationalism. Patriotism is just a pride for one's country. Nationalism or chauvinism is belief in superiority of your nation. You can make a distinction there. I don't know if you'd agree with that. It serves a moral purpose. It gives people pride, and I think it's also, especially at this time, with all of the threats in the world that we're facing, it's also vital for national security, because ultimately the moral component is very important for prevailing in warfare and for asserting our interests in the world. And therefore, if you doubt yourself, if there is an element of self doubt, or if you're confused about what you're fighting for, then that puts any kind of operation or diplomatic mission at risk. Do you see that? Do you see that social benefit for patriotism, or is it more of a dangerous concoction that you want to control?
I see what you say, and kind of I understand the reasoning for it. I mean, just going back to something you said a couple of minutes ago, and it took me back to when I was at a Lib Dem Party conference a few years ago now, when Tim Farron was leader of my party, and he said, I think a couple of times in different speeches, that patriots love their country and nationalists hate their neighbours. And I always thought that was quite an interesting way of putting things. I guess the Scots Nats and Plaid Cymru would say that they're civic nationalists, and they make a difference. That they would argue that it's not about hating their neighbours, they would say, and it's about love for their country and wanting to see their country prosper, which they believe can only happen with independence. So that's for another day. We can talk about that. But I always thought that was quite an interesting quote from Tim Farron. I mean, I guess what I would say is that, look, maybe both the right and the left need to act on this. Maybe the left need to stop overthinking this thing, and obviously I include myself in this. Stop overthinking this thing, and recognize, as you say, Chris, that we can talk about all the bad things of our country that need sorting out on every other day of the year. But on St George's Day, it is about celebrating the best of England. But maybe the right also needs to stop having quite such a good time on the day, poking fun at the left, because in a sense you kind of provoke us into having the view that we hold. If I can put it.
Who's doing the provoking? Like that every year you get the various left-wing journalists, the usual suspects. I won't mention names, but they always say, St George wasn't English, he was Turkish, even though he is Cappadocian Greek. But that's part that to one side. We provoke each other, don't we? And
Right.
that's because we kind of like winding each other up.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and so maybe we both sets of people need to be the best versions of ourselves. What I will say to you, Chris, and I've literally just made this decision whilst I've been sitting here, is that I know that tomorrow here in good old Hinckley, which I love my town. They're having their St George's Day little celebrations in town, and in my disgruntled way, I thought, well, good on the people them for doing that, and the families that will go to that. But that I hadn't been planning on going, but I think I've now decided to go
And
to that tomorrow.
and you're going to wear a St George's suit and a St George's hat, and you're going to be waving the flag.
I'm not going to do that, but I am going to go, and I'm going to try and go with an open mind. And because, I mean, I guess my other, just to say this very quickly, because I know we're coming towards the end now, but I guess my other kind of complaint, if you want to call it that, is that I find some of it, and again, I may well be wrong in this, but I find some of how it's described as a bit twee, just a little bit twee, really. And I thought that when I saw, I don't know if you're aware, I'm sure you are, Chris, aware of the Labour MP Mike Tapp, who's like patriotism on steroids. He really, the videos he puts out with Churchill in them and all of that. And I saw him do his bit on St George's Day and talking about Sunday roasts and a pint and a cup of tea in the football. And I just thought, is that kind of it? Is that it? I just kind of found it a bit twee. Now, again, I might be wrong in that, but I just thought surely it must just be more than about that.
Well, I mean, there's you can talk about the whole kind of range of things, whether it's culture, whether it's literature, whether it's architecture. It's the whole, and it's about democracy, but it's about our democracy and how our democracy evolved. For me, the most important element of English identity is maritime. That's what that's what we should be about. That's what really distinguishes us, and our distinct sort of maritime history, and which has the lineage from the English Navy before we were unified. That especially as a defence guy, it's we're an island. We're dependent on the sea. So that should be a fundamental part of not only our strategic culture, but also our culture generally. And I think that isn't made enough. And my concern with the Labour government is that it seems to think that we're another European land power when we're not. And islands have to think different strategically to land powers. Otherwise it just doesn't. It just doesn't work. So I'd like to see more emphasis on sort of our naval past. I always say, the question about whether St George's Day be a bank holiday, I'd be open to that. But we have a lot of days or bank holidays already in at this time of the year. So I would if we're going to have another bank holiday, which I don't think any government would ever do, but if we do, then I would probably have it somewhere else in the year, either Trafalgar Day, or if St George isn't doing it for you, then we have another previous patron saint, which is St Edmund, which is celebrated in November. So if you want an actual English patron saint, then we can celebrate both. We can be inclusive. And you say about the English flag not being inclusive. Well, Georgia has a variation of of the flag, so it's probably the most inclusive flag of them all, really, isn't it? And the Union Jack has all of the different nations on it
because
as
if
well.
I was to celebrate what I would think of as the best of England, it would be my nearest city of Leicester. The first minority majority city, a city of absolute cultural diversity. Now, Leicester has its issues, like everywhere does. But I guess if I was to celebrate the nation, that's the way I'd want to celebrate it. I'd want to celebrate the full diversity and complexity of the nation. So, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I do just worry that what's being celebrated is very narrow. When if we're going to celebrate England as a nation, let's celebrate the full diversity of the country. So that would be my point on that, Chris.
And I think because you offered you offered an olive branch during the course. I think yes, those of us on my side, we need to keep maintaining. I think we do this enough, but you can always do more in terms of calling out the morons on our side and say any act of violence in the name of the flag is unacceptable, doesn't represent what we are, and yes, they don't represent any form of patriotism. So I think, and the more we do this, then perhaps the more we give less reason for the left to say the extremists have reclaimed it, although I think some will do it regardless because it suits their political agenda. But yes, we should, yes, wherever someone does, and it's just like in any other group as well, but where if someone claims to do something immoral in the name of the flag, then yeah, of course we should call it out and say, no, you don't represent anybody but a small fringe of idiots.
Absolutely.
So,
Can I just say, Chris, before we get ready to close this episode, that I really think we shouldn't let this episode pass by without saying that obviously, we're very saddened to hear of the death of the Pope, of Pope Francis. I think whatever your, I'm Christian but not Catholic, and I think whatever your view of his politics or indeed his religion. I think we can say that actually he was, in my view at least, one of the better popes of recent times. He obviously had a very deep heart for Christ, a very deep heart for people, and you could see that from many of the videos, especially when he was kind of speaking with children, etc. And just seemed a good guy, if I can put it like that, Chris.
I think one of the things that struck me, especially at the start, was his emphasis on the poor and caring for the poor, and that's what I in terms of the positives, that's what I remember of his papacy. I have to admit, I don't, obviously I'm not Catholic either. But it's always sad when anyone dies, and it's obviously sad when a pope dies as well. And yeah, so yeah, it's really really sad news. And yeah,
And I know
my
that we happen to be recording this on Friday evening, the day before the funeral, and obviously people all listen to watch this podcast at any time. They can do that. So you may well be watching this or listening to it when that has happened, the funeral. But I know that they've had thousands, I think tens of thousands, walk past his
yeah.
coffin, and that it's going to be an occasion tomorrow where a lot of people will attend, and where millions will be watching and listening around the world. So a significant piece of history as well as anything else, Chris.
Yeah, and it's always fascinating to see these these ceremonies, and which go back a long way. Is always is always fascinating to see it. But of course we reflect on the loss as well, and as well as look into what might happen next with the Catholic Church.
Now, next for us, next week, all being well, all being equal, and if we're both happy and healthy, we'll be back talking about what we'll know by then, which is the local election results. And we all
Yes.
love a good election, don't we, Chris? We absolutely love it.
Yeah, yeah, love election time, and yeah, we'll see, and it will be our first real opportunity to look at the state of the parties again, after what we did in terms of our Christmas special. So we'll see, what actually happens, and where the parties stand after real votes are cast. Now, obviously, it's not totally nationwide, but it's the closest thing to a nationwide election that we've got, and we'll see what happens when real votes are cast and counted. So yeah, really looking forward to that next week, and we'll see if the Lib Dems make their characteristic local election sort of gains.
Well, I mean, just to say, my predictions are, for what they're worth, is that I think Reform will do well, albeit they start from a low base, so it's not difficult for them to do well in that sense. But I do think they'll do well. I think Labour will do very badly. I think the most interesting for me, because I agree with you, I think my party will do well and gain a good number of seats. I think the most interesting thing is how the Tories do, actually.
That's hard to predict.
No, I mean, you'd expect them to make gains, but I'm probably sure they will. But whether it'll be a lot, I'm not so sure. I don't know.
Yeah, and they start from, because they start from quite a high base as well, because the last elections were the height of the, when Boris was at his height. So but there has been quite a lot of expectation management from from the Tories. So Basingstoke may or may not sort of scrape through on that one, but we'll see.
But can I just say, Chris, just before we go, that I know I say this every week, but it's because we've got to get the message out there. Please do all the internety things. Please like, please subscribe, please follow us on Twitter. We're at, or X as we must call it now. We're at Frenemies. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe, please ding the bell so you find out when we've posted new content. Please do all the internety things, and please tell your friends about us. And also, just to say, and this is some exclusive news, is that on occasion, this will only be an on occasion thing, because most weeks it's me and Chris debating the politics and then remaining friends afterwards. But we are going to be, on some occasional weeks, some special weeks, we're going to be having some guests, aren't we, Chris?
Yeah, and thanks to the people who've already volunteered, and yeah, we're going to hopefully invite you all on at some point, not at the same time, but at some point. It's just a case of getting the podcast started and getting logistics sorted, because our schedules are quite chaotic in terms of filming this. But if you can put up with that, then we're very happy to have people on. So
yeah, we've got some really interesting guests lined up. And again, with them, some of them Chris will agree with more, some of them I will agree with more. But again, the aim will be to have robust and fair debates throughout the course of the podcast, but then to remain friends afterwards, because that is what we're all about on Political Frenemies.
Indeed. Right. So, well, I think we've had quite a interesting discussion today. As we said, we're going to discuss the local elections next time. But for now, it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me.
And do join us next week on Political Frenemies. Goodbye.